Why don't you go ahead, Andrea?
Welcome to the Run Mountains Conservancy's annual evening event. I am Andrea Currier, president of the organization. Tonight we have gathered together, not in our local parish hall, but through the electronic threads of computer technology. What magic of facilitation this is. The evening is given on behalf of our gentle Piedmont, a living mountainous foothills greenbelt west of Washington. In the 1960s, 2,000 acres, give or take, was gifted to the Commonwealth by 3 local conservation-minded individuals, Alice Mills and Audrey and Stephen Currier. Our organization began its work in 1994 as local friends, opening the mountains to the public for the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, their owner. For 27 years, our purpose has been to encourage enjoyment in education, study through the science, and to promote the respect and preservation of the natural world. Our commitment to education, scientific research, and stewardship began in the Bull Run Mountains, our neighbor. And over time, our scope has expanded to cover additional regional properties. Please help our board continue this work by making a contribution to the Bull Run Mountains Conservancy, and do join us for our programs under the able leadership of Michael Kiefer, our executive director. Tonight, we are privy to a conversation between neighbors, Tim Dunn and Mark Tercek, here in the northern end of the protected Bull Run Mountains. Humans are studies in contrast. We are clever, visionary, and we are stubbornly habitual. Mark and Tim will help us consider how we can respect and preserve our finite, fragile, aging, and renewable planet home with a smart global economy. It can be accomplished. Please welcome my friend and colleague, Tim Dunn, and his friend, Mark Tercek.
Thank you, Andrea. That was I didn't take a moment to kind of take that in. Very kind. And I do want to also acknowledge that our director of the Bull Run Mountain Conservancy, Michael Kiefer, is not able to join us because he's on, but he's not able to be on in video format because he doesn't have the world's greatest Wi-Fi. But it is his birthday, so we should all kind of acknowledge, happy birthday, Michael. Hope you're enjoying it by doing this and enjoying your family. And Mark, sorry, before we get to, for those in the audience, again, we will take questions through the Q&A box. You can't ask questions verbally. You need to type it into the Q&A box, and we'll be checking that as we go. So thank you for participating on this session, and we're really happy to have Mark in the room with us, so to speak. Normally it would be in Grace Church, which is a great part of the Plains and a great community gathering place, but we're happy to have a virtual version this year. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being a new neighbor in the Bull Run Mountains, and thank you for sharing your time tonight with us.
Thank you, Tim and Andrea. I'm really happy to be here. My wife, Amy's on the call too. We're really happy to be new neighbors. We live in the Plains, and we love every moment of it.
Fabulous. So Mark, we're going to go through a kind of a conversation tonight, and we're going to start out a little bit about you and kind of your growing up and kind of what made you Mark Tercek. And then we're going to get into kind of the core of your intellectual property, which is sort of the whole idea, the value of nature, and how do we use nature, valuing nature and the markets to protect the planet and solve some of these great global challenges. And then we'll bring it back home to the Bull Run Mountains at the end. So that's kind of the narrative.
That's good.
We'll keep it lively and keep each other honest here. So rather than doing a full formal introduction of Mark Tercek, let me say a few things about Mark, and then I'd love to hear you react. So Mark grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. He met his wife in high school and been happily married ever since. He's a vegan. He was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs for 24 years. He ran the world's largest environmental NGO. father of four, all pretty amazing things, different aspects. So I'm leaving out books you've written and all the other things you do, and now the author of The Instigator. But let's kind of go back to the beginning of Cleveland. You grew up, like my wife did, in Cleveland, Ohio in the 60s and 70s, the time when infamously the river caught on fire. So what was it like growing up in Cleveland, and what was it like when that happened? And did that influence kind of where you ended up going in your life?
Sure. Thanks for the nice intro. Those facts were all accurate. Yeah, growing up in Cleveland, I loved growing up in Cleveland. I remember that vividly. My four grandparents were all immigrants from Slovenia. And I lived right in the city, not in the suburbs, right in the city of Cleveland, in a kind of working class immigrant neighborhood. And my grandparents were frugal people, as you would imagine. And they believed, you should grow as much of your food as possible. So in our backyard in Cleveland, we had a huge garden, and we had an apple, pear, plum, and cherry trees. We had one of each, which produced, it's amazing. They really produced great fruit. And our garden was hugely productive. But suddenly, I remember it vividly because one of my chores was taking care of all that. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. Suddenly, the trees stopped producing good fruit. It was very dramatic. Like, we had great fruit and suddenly we did not. That's when the river caught on fire. There was a TV show at the time called Laugh-In. It was sort of, old people will remember, it was like the Saturday Night Live of its time. And it always made fun of Cleveland, which as a kid sort of pissed me off. It was bad. But that's when President Nixon was our president. I think it was 1971. The EPA was created, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act were passed. It was really the bad news of America's environmental conditions became probably our most successful period of environmental legislation ever. So I remember all of that, and it was a pretty important moment in time. And then what's interesting to me is I'm one of these people who is always trying to get the private sector to do more to achieve environmental progress, and I believe the private sector can do a lot. But the big event of that time was the Clean Air Act, in my view. I mean, the air was just so bad in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, LA, and so it was hard to do, but under President Nixon, we passed the Clean Air Act. It required a 95% reduction in tailpipe emissions. The auto industry, so again, I often praise the private sector for its leadership, but they were wrong. They said, oh no, this could never be achieved, what the Clean Air Act requires. It will cost millions of jobs and billions of dollars, and they fought it tooth and nail. But air quality was so bad, we passed that legislation anyway. And then shortly thereafter, necessity is the mother of invention. The catalytic converter was invented, and that's why we have clear blue skies today. We still have air pollution issues to address, of course, but I think the moral of the story is government policy, courageous, bold government policy can make a huge difference. And as ugly as that period of time was from an environmental perspective, it generated our most productive period as a country.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great observation, and it was we'll see if we're about to re-enter a period of
we'll see
and involvement. We'll get to that in a minute. So before we get off of you, I want to go also to you. I think you've been a devoted vegan for quite some time. So talk about that. And was that about the planet, or is that about your health? Is that about kind of how did you evolve into that? Or maybe you grew up that way. Maybe you were always vegan.
No. I'm not really an evangelist about being a vegan, but I think people should consider eating less meat. In my case, I was an investment banker, as you noted, and late in my career, I was sort of a senior person. And one of the groups I was overseeing was what we called our consumer group. And among the companies we worked with were food companies. And we were doing a deal, financing for a food company. I won't name it. And for some reason, the senior banker in charge couldn't participate in the due diligence session. So I went myself to fill in and learned firsthand about how livestock were treated. And I was really appalled. And that led very quickly to me to decide not to eat meat. So it was more about animal rights or just how we treat animals. Then subsequent to that, I stopped eating fish because there wasn't really any good logic chain for me to not eat meat, but eat fish. But that was a little bit harder for me because I had lived in Japan twice and really enjoyed Japanese cuisine. But it turned out that wasn't that hard either, to stop eating fish. So I was happy about that. It was easy for me to stop eating meat. And in each case, I felt better afterwards. Around this time, I think I was becoming a quite energetic environmentalist, but that's not what drove it. Then I read something about dairy, and I thought, well, I should experiment with dropping dairy. So I became a vegan, and to be honest, then I really felt great. So maybe I had some aversion to dairy anyway. So I became a vegan basically for animal rights reasons. But one man's opinion. I'm not pounding the table here. Of course, as I learned more and more about the environment in my own personal journey, I understood how both meat and fish eating diets are an issue for us to contend with. So it nicely comported with that. So it had an environmental angle. And then I also felt great. It reminds me of a funny story. When I was running TNC, I used to go to Davos every year. It was a very productive place to go. I know the press would make you cynical about Davos, but actually it is a great place to spend time with CEOs and government officials to try to make important things happen. And so while I was there, I would I had to earn my keep because I got to go for free. So Davos asked me to run a panel discussion, which included a bunch of important people, but including Jane Goodall, everybody's hero, Jane Goodall. And so I'm the moderator, and Jane is sort of hard to manage. She's like an independent woman. And so, of course, I asked her the first question to show my respect. And I asked her some geeky question, like you might guess I would. And she turned to me and she said, "Mark, that is such a boring, pedantic question. Why would you waste your time with a question like that? Why aren't you asking me why I'm a vegan?" Then she turns to the audience and she said, "Look at us. We look great. We feel great. Our diet matches our values. You should all be vegans." And the audience applauded. I don't know how many opinions or habits were changed, but that's my little take on veganism. I would just say people should try it, and I bet you'd be surprised. It's easier to do than you might think.
Well, you covered a lot there, but I really loved it because you gave everyone lots of things to think about, and we haven't even gotten to the value of nature, but of course we have, because everything that we're going to talk about, and pretty much everything in life, is about nature.
Yep.
So that's probably where we're going to go to next, which is this kind of key point about how we're going to, well, I don't want to get too burdened down with all the bad things that are happening in the world, but we know there's big challenges.
Yep.
And you have for a long time talked about the intersection of capital markets and the environment. And at the core of that is this conversation around valuing nature and what is the value of nature. So let's go for it. Let's go ahead into it, and just maybe start out. You just kind of talking about how you think about the importance of value of nature and why you think it's important.
Well, okay, I'll go first, but Tim, you should offer your view too, because you have an interesting perspective. The way I started thinking about this is it was like the joy of my life. I switched from TNC to become from Goldman Sachs to be the CEO of the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is a great organization, not perfect, but great. It was great before I got there. It's great now, and will be greater after I left. And at the Nature Conservancy, because the Nature Conservancy was big, we were trying to do big things. So we were trying to protect nature at scale. And we were doing well. And there are so many great conservation organizations. There are a bunch of really important ones in our neighborhood, but there are big ones, small ones. There are a lot of them. The Nature Conservancy is just one more. Anyway, my job was to get more done. And it seemed to me that in order to succeed, we needed more. To reach all of our goals, we needed more resources on our side. We needed more people on our side. We needed more money on our side. We needed more political clout. We had a lot of all that, but we needed even more. Further, it seemed to me that most supporters of the Nature Conservancy, including me, I bet a lot of people on this phone call tonight, we thought we should just protect nature because it's the right thing to do. We love nature. We owe future generations. We want to be good ancestors. We want future generations to enjoy the natural world we enjoyed. We care about other species. So that's me. I think protecting nature is just the right thing to do. But not enough people think that way. We should get as many people to think that way as we can, but not everybody thinks that way. And for some people, it's hard, like in developing countries where TNC did a lot of work, and there are a lot of people in poverty and a lot of vulnerable people. They sometimes think first things first. We've got to take care of our people. We've got to be concerned with livelihoods and health and education, et cetera. So then it seemed to me, as the boss of the Nature Conservancy, and people pushed back on this at first, we shouldn't only talk about or talk to people who believe protecting nature is the right thing to do. We should also help people understand that nature is this asset base upon which all of humanity depends. Nature is the natural capital, or the green infrastructure, if you will, that provides clean air to breathe, healthy food, good water, a stable climate if we don't screw it up, biodiversity, protection from storms, and on soils in which to grow food, and on and on and on. You can think of that in business terms. Some people don't like, they used to challenge me when I would say that, because they say you're commoditizing nature, but I never thought so. I said, no, this is additive. I'm for protecting nature for nature's sake, but in order to succeed, we need more people on our side, more financial resources, more political clout. So I think it makes sense to also help people understand that nature is another important asset that we should protect and take good care of and nourish, so that it will sustain us in future generations. So in my view, it's additive. That argument has caught on. I don't want us to just do to me. It's just as people become more and more concerned about different challenges we face, people better understand how important it is to protect nature. But just because they understand it doesn't mean it will be easy. So there's a campaign underway now called 30 by 30. And most of the world's leading countries, including the United States, under our new president, have signed up for this, and many companies and most environmental NGOs. And the idea is to protect 30% of habitat, global habitat, by the year 2030. So land and marine. Today, I think about 15% of land is protected and about 7% of marine. So we have a long way to go. But there are a lot of reasons to do this. But if you let me oversimplify, one reason to do that is it's just the right thing to do. And of course, Ed Wilson argues, I think persuasively, we should protect half of the world. But to do that, we'll have to get to 30% first. So if you just believe in nature for nature's sake, great, please support this. But if that's not your highest priority, but you just care about the health of humankind, especially vulnerable people, there's probably no smarter investment strategy than protecting nature at scale along those lines.
Yeah.
But what do you think, Tim?
Well, you know what I think, but obviously, for those in the audience who don't know, I had a background in not investment banking, investment management, and then I spent a lot of time in the environmental NGO world, and now I'm very focused on the combination of those two. And part of my thesis was that knowing the importance of the capital markets where Mark worked and I worked before, and creating impact, negative and positive impact in the world, but a powerful force, was failing to understand, or at least to price, the key resources that we as humans are dependent on, and all life on Earth are dependent on. And that's a problem. When people are ignoring something that is actually essential, that's a problem, right? So as you said, it's at least additive to the circumstance to start to create pricing for these primary resources and value them, so that those who are focused on and live their lives that way are recognizing it and forced to appreciate it, and we're better preserving it. So I embrace that, but I do know there's a lot of controversy. So let's talk about one thing that a lot of people talk about. We were talking about actually the Run Mountains Conservancy, like, should we be trying to value the forests of the Bull Run Mountains? And people were like, that'd be really interesting. How should we do it? Others were like, well, should we really be putting a dollar price on a tree?
All right.
And so, and you've heard that, I know, but how do you think about that? I mean,
well, I sort of get distracted a little bit by that philosophical debate. It's, I'm sure, worthwhile to have, but I don't feel like that's my strong suit. The way I used to think about it is just, we want to protect more and more. The more nature we protect, the better. So I wrote about this recently in my newsletter. In my early days at the Nature Conservancy, Colombia had suffered these horrible floods. The Magdalena River had overflowed badly. Lots of lives were lost. And so the government decided they had to do something. So they came up with this big sum of money to invest in protecting citizens, really. They were focused on people from the danger of floods. So then I was sent down there and met with the Ministry of the Environment. The title of his department had been changed, though, to the Ministry of Environment and Economic Development, which I thought right off the bat, I said, oh, this is telling, this is revealing, because Colombia, it's, I guess now maybe a middle income country, but they still have a lot of poor people. And it's a culture that cares a lot about its natural resources, but they also think first things first, we've got to take care of our people. They need livelihoods and jobs, et cetera. So I went there and argued, instead of building levees up and down the Magdalena River, you should do floodplain restoration, because floodplain restoration would be just as effective, maybe probably more effective, we argued, at absorbing floodwaters in those circumstances. But it would be done in a way that would nourish agricultural land. It would obviously be a huge boost for biodiversity, which is an important part of Costa Rica's overall economy. And so rather than have that lofty philosophical argument, we rather said, when you're thinking about infrastructure investments in Colombia, but the same thing would be true right now in the United States, consider whether nature might be a better investment than green infrastructure might outperform gray, cost less, perform better, and provide lots of important co-benefits. So, if you restore floodplains in Colombia to deal with floods, or you restore coastal ecosystems around the US to deal with sea level rise, it's not always going to be the better solution than gray. And sometimes it's going to be a mix of gray and green, fine. But you're going to get co-benefits that are really powerful for protecting nature, habitat for biodiversity, carbon sequestration, et cetera. So I've always tried to focus on those more practical dimensions of these matters.
Yeah. I'm actually slowly reading a book called Magdalena on that.
Oh, I wrote a book about this too, Nature's Fortune. It's a little bit out of date now, but it's like 6 or 7 years old. But it just shows how it's not like I invented any of this. I didn't invent anything. But as the boss of TNC, I became aware of the academics who had these smart ideas. And I thought I had a chance in my role to make them easier to understand. So I wrote a book. It was reasonably well received, but it's amazing. At the time, some of these ideas were considered novel, or people weren't uncertain, and some traditional environmentalists didn't like them. But this kind of thinking has become mainstream. So progress can be achieved. I mean, it really hasn't been that long a time. So it'll be interesting. As we know, the Biden administration now has these big infrastructure plans, and you can be sure NGOs will be arguing, don't forget about green infrastructure. But I think engineering firms will be arguing that now too. And I bet there will ultimately be quite a bit of green infrastructure in the White House's infrastructure proposals. So think that you can make progress, believe it or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I want to come back to the government role in a minute, because it's fascinating and it's powerful. But sticking on the concept, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about this concept of natural capital and sort of this initiative around, literally the initiative around natural capital. And I don't know, if you want to describe it, but sort of the way that, at a country level or in a geographic area, people are starting to figure out how to take into account, there's been this argument always, we need to put houses up, we need to put roads in, that's how we create economic development. But that's because people aren't thinking about the loss value of the nature that's being overrun in some cases.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit what, natural capital and how it can help.
Well, it's a great question. You might articulate this better than me, but then fine, what is natural capital? That is that That is all of the nature that's providing us, humankind, valuable services. We call them ecosystem services. And of course, they're vital to humankind's survival. Clean air, water, food, protection from storms, biodiversity. We need all of that. And academics have done a pretty good job, but they're doing an even better job more recently of quantifying the value of that capital. And then more worrisomely, they're measuring how we're drawing that capital down at an unsustainable rate. So a professor named, I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I don't know the gentleman. Dasgupta, Dasgupta. He's either at Oxford or Cambridge, I think. Anyway, the last couple of months, you can Google his name, Dasgupta. He came out with this study, and it's very alarming. He just points out that, it's obvious we depend on these ecosystem services from nature to survive. Vulnerable people, poorer people, especially depend on them, soil to grow food, etc. And then he calculates how we're drawing this all down at a completely unsustainable rate. And if we don't reverse this soon, it's another challenge like climate change. We're just painting ourselves into a corner. It was very well timed, this report. It got a lot of attention. And that's what is a big driver. That kind of thinking is a big driver behind this 30 by 30 campaign. But we can keep it simpler. All that means is we need to protect nature as much as we can, wherever we can, and at the highest, the biggest amount of scale. I think it's why the Bull Run Mountain Conservancy is really important, because maybe this is a digression, but I only became an environmentalist late in life as a parent. Amy and I we thought we should introduce our kids to nature. We felt guilty about how little we knew. We immediately fell in love with nature and became champions of nature. I devoted the rest of my professional life to it. And that's what I think the Bull Run Mountain Conservancy is doing. It's just bringing to people's attention how precious this resource is, but we don't treat it like a precious resource. If you think about most old-fashioned assets, man-made assets, people worry about them. Accountants measure very accurately depreciation rates and these kinds of things. Businesses don't succeed if they don't take good care of maintaining their plant and equipment. But we haven't done that with nature. It's a huge oversight by humankind. Now we know better, at least the intellectuals in the field do. And then what humankind has to do, it's hard not to sound grandiose when we talk about this, we have to persuade our governments and our business leaders to change how we behave so we don't completely deplete this resource to our peril.
We could stop right there. I think we just covered it, but let's keep going. And for those in the audience, for everyone in the audience, we are open to taking questions from Mark. So just type them into the Q&A box. I also note that I think one of our fellow board members, Callie Broadus, is putting some information up. She shared something about Dasgupta. So there's information populating in the chat box, and ask questions if you want them to be relayed to Mark. So talked about natural capital. We talked about the value of nature a little bit. Where do you think, are these nascent realities, or are they things that are really starting to populate decision-making to a point where it's actually starting to see a change?
Yeah, I think things are changing. So now I've thought this before, so I hope I'm not wrong, but these days, after I left the Nature Conservancy about 1.5 years ago, so these days I'm working as an advisor to leaders on ambitious environmental strategies, some with NGOs, but mostly with private sector players. And the private sector understands this now fully, I would say. And I think it's quite encouraging because there are some business people who are, great people and they love the environment and they just want to protect the environment because it's the right thing to do. That's wonderful, and we appreciate it. But it's even more encouraging, I think, and more important that business leaders who don't have any priority about caring about nature, they now understand how high the economic stakes are and how important it is then that we address these different challenges, like insurance companies. I was an advisor, my gig just ended, but to AXA, the French insurer. So kind of makes sense, right? Insurers are like the holders of risk at the last analysis, and they understand fully the perils of climate change, biodiversity loss, et cetera. and have energetic programs to address that. But that's more and more widespread. Even very cynical business people, I think, are now getting it. And there's a whole bunch of factors. Investors like your firm, Tim, are putting pressure on people. They get that, so they pay more attention. Employees and recruits and customers care more. But I think what the biggest factor is, if you're a successful business person, you look ahead, you assess risk, you make plans to deal with that, and business people are catching on that we face some really big challenges and we need to address them now. So then there are a lot of really great voluntary initiatives underway in business, which is encouraging. What will be even more important, I think, then, is if the business community helps us campaign for the government policy we need, because that's ultimately the most important thing. The politics on a lot of this is tough, but I think it too should probably get better. So I think there's reason for, cautious optimism, but I don't want to be Pollyannish. We have a lot to do in a hurry, or we're really, again, kind of painting ourselves into a corner.
That's great. So here we are 50 miles west of DC. There's a lot of politicking going on. It's a really interesting period. A lot of potential for real change. I mean, clearly some change has already happened in the first couple of months of the Biden administration. But there's this thorny issue about corporate lobbying and the dark money of corporate lobbying, and in a Senate that's divided evenly and a House that is, leaning towards doing a lot of important work. How much of an issue is that? And, I know it's a little off topic, but I think it's really important because we all care. We all in this audience, a lot of people pay a lot of attention to what's going on in Washington.
Yeah.
Worry about have we gotten far enough where the corporate money is going to really stop being a barrier to action versus and maybe become a supporter of action.
Yeah. It's not really my area of expertise. There definitely have been problems with dark money and bad lobbying in the past. The world has become so transparent. I don't think there's as much of that anymore because you get killed by, critics and campaigners who can figure out almost everything. So I think we're getting past, by and large, bad lobbying behavior by the private sector. I'm sure there are still exceptions, but mostly I think that's coming to an end. But I don't think we have enough yet positive lobbying for what we need. So I won't name the two senators who brought this to my attention because they didn't say I could be public. But you might remember when right after Trump was elected, and the question was, would we or would we not drop out of the Paris Climate Accord? And so I knew some people in the White House, and I called. They said, Mark, Trump is never going to listen to environmentalists, so forget that. But he might listen to business leaders. And so the Nature Conservancy and many NGOs got the business community to really speak up. And it was impressive. I know this is a bad story because Trump dropped out, but it doesn't matter now. We're back in. But anyway, business leaders called Trump. They called others in the White House. They sent in letters. They ran ads in the newspaper. It was a pretty impressive display by corporate America that the White House, America should not drop out of the Paris Climate Accord. But two senators took me aside and said, Mark, this is bullshit. All these companies, I mean, good for you. You got them all to do this, better than nothing. But when these same companies and their CEOs come to Capitol Hill with their lobbying asks, climate is never on the list. It's not even lowest on the list. It's just not on the list. So I asked some of the CEOs that I was working closely with at the time. I told them about that. I said, is that true? And they said, that is kind of true. And the cat is out of the bag now. People are talking about that. I've written about it, but a lot of people are writing about it. And I think we're going to see more and more pressure on companies to match their pretty positive talk now about their own and commitments to environmental progress, have their lobbying activity match that. And there are signs of progress. The Chamber of Commerce has improved their positions. The Business Roundtable has improved their positions. They actually had pretty backward positions on climate and other environmental matters. And the pressure's on. So I think, if you're a customer, if you're a board member, if you're an important shareholder, if you're an employee, you should push your company to do the right thing on this front. I don't think it's a huge ask, but it's an ask. You have to fight for one more thing. And I think we need that because it's hard to get the policy we need. It probably would be even better to get money out of politics, but we don't have enough time for that. We should try to do that too, but it's not going to happen fast enough.
Right. So you used a phrase that touches on a question that one of the audience members asked, which was getting money out of something. And the question was around the divest movement and around the energy companies. And I know from my experiences on the TNC board of Virginia that TNC went through a really interesting experience about divesting back, was that 10 years ago?
Not that long, but yeah, we did it. It was a little messy.
Yeah, talk about like maybe that experience, what that was like, and kind of what you think about those kind of initiatives, sort of the divest versus the kind of.
I think there's room. I think reasonable people can disagree here. Divestment was never my top strategy. TNC ultimately divested. I really pushed hard for it because it seemed to me, as a leading environmental organization with a big endowment, it would be kind of crazy for us to be investing in fossil fuel companies. I screwed up a little bit in how we communicated it. So I managed to offend good supporters of TNC who were connected to the fossil fuel sector. I didn't execute perfectly. These things are really complicated. But for TNC, it made sense, and TNC acted on that basis. Whether other organizations should divest or not, I think is complicated because, but I would say to the divestment groups, congratulations, they've created a lot of progress. Exhibit A would be Exxon. It's not just divestment, but divestment and other environmentalist pressure on Exxon has caused, finally, belatedly, but better late than never, a rather dramatic pivot by the company. They haven't figured out completely how they'll pivot, but I spoke to the CEO recently, and I was persuaded, he's sincere, they're trying to figure out how to pivot that organization in a way that it's aligned with Paris climate goals. It'll be complicated and won't be easy, but I think the divestment movement deserves credit for that. So I think the divestment movement has accomplished a lot. But they're also at Exxon, I hadn't thought of this, there's shareholder pressure that has had a big impact too. And so that's from people who hold Exxon stock and as owners are pounding the table, insisting on change. I would say the moral of the story from my perspective is there's room for many strategies to achieve environmental progress. And I never feel like I'm smart enough to know which strategy is the best. So I say the more strategies, the better. When people criticize my strategies at TNC, I would always say, well, our critics are our friends. They want what we want, environmental progress. So let's not take the criticism personally. Let's pay close attention. Maybe they'll see something we're missing. And then finally, I would just say, I think environmentalists should be kinder to one another. You can disagree more politely. This is hard work. None of this is straightforward. It's all very difficult. Lots of well-intentioned people are doing their best. And if you disagree with another ardent environmentalist, but you can imagine they're doing their best, then disagree politely, share and debate ideas, and let's see which strategies work best, because none of them are working well enough. And so I say the more the better.
Right. So based on many of your comments, I know you're not going to be someone who says there's a silver bullet out there to solve any of these problems. And even something as specific as when you go and you are meeting with a politician, a senator, a congressperson, someone in a key role in the government, are there things that you or you think other people should be prioritizing in terms of, because you can raise a gazillion issues. So how do you kind of bring it home to them saying, well, this is the one or two, they want to hear the one or two things that you're interested in them doing, or you want them to hear from you. What do you tend to say?
I'm very humble. It's another thing I would advise everybody, be humble. None of this stuff is that obvious. I used to think, like so many environmentalists, especially kind of, Wall Street type environmentalists, a price on carbon, it was the most important thing and would unlock the most progress. I've come to understand how hard that is politically, in part because it would be a very regressive imposition on lower income and lower middle class people, for whom their energy bill is a much larger percentage of their monthly expenses than for more well-to-do people, and mostly for that reason, but also for other reasons, the electorate just isn't very excited about a carbon tax right now. So politics is the art of the possible, not the art of the optimal. So my thinking has changed a lot, and I've watched the Biden team with a lot of interest, and I think they're being smart. They're, you know, well, the other thing I learned when I started TNC right after President Obama was elected, and wow, it was so fast, right? We worked hard on a cap and trade bill that failed at the time. The time went like that. Before you knew it, it was time for the midterm elections. And before you knew it, after that, President Obama was running for office again. So the window of opportunity for legislative gains is narrow. So I think the Biden administration is being pretty savvy about thinking of a political reality. What can we achieve that will really work to result in climate progress in the short window we have? And so I think we're going to see more things like appliance standards, renewable portfolio standards. And economists would say, and I would have said a few years ago, oh, those are less good ways to go. That's not the optimally efficient way to achieve goals. It may be, but my optimally efficient way is like not likely to happen. And these other approaches work. They're a little more expensive, but that expense isn't noticed very well, and it's borne by this huge economy, and no one feels it quite as dramatically. So my own thinking has changed a lot, and I now think politics is the art of the possible, not the optimal. And I think I'm quite encouraged. The place where you see the best policies at the state level, where governors and also at the city level, they have to balance their budgets. They don't have time for this lofty stuff. They got to get stuff done, and we can learn, I think, at the federal level a lot from what's happened at the state level.
Yeah, it's great points. And, you know, as you were saying, it's the old adage about don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
In the legislative world, everyone was wanting to go for that silver bullet, but there's a lot of small things we can do that add up meaningfully. And as you said, even in places where like California, where they did lofty things, and it made a significant difference to their environment. So
yep.
A lot can happen without it necessarily being in, you know, a big environmental bill in Washington. We only have about 15 minutes left, and I do want to transition a little bit. And, you know, we've been talking some big picture global environmental challenges, and, you know, we are all virtually in the Bull Run Mountains here. You literally, I'm actually, to be honest, I'm in North Carolina at the moment, but that's separate. But I'll be back in the Bull Run Mountains tomorrow, and we are, for full disclosure, near neighbors to each other, as near as you get in the out in our area. So talk a little bit about, first of all, why did you guys decide to become residents of the Bull Run Mountains, or you just found a nice house?
We sort of stumbled into this. We were renting a house. There's a little house on the Mellon estate called Hill House. It was my wife Amy's idea, not mine. We were renting it pre-COVID. But while I worked at the Nature Conservancy, I really worked hard. I'm not complaining. It was a joy to have that job. But it's a global organization, and I was traveling 4 days a week at least, often globally. So I was completely consumed with my job, and we were living in DC. I was not very focused on DC, nor at this lovely little house that Amy had rented. And so I just wasn't paying much attention to the Bull Run area. Then COVID happened, and then for some complicated family reasons, we had to kind of split up. And we were just about to let the lease on that house expire, but we didn't, because we said, oh, right this minute, it would be good to have a kind of a place to separate people in our family. Some had COVID, some didn't. And so there was a contingent then at Hill House in Upperville. I was in DC. This is for COVID reasons, but I would go out there and safely visit, and my kids were out there. And we discovered in the stressful period, especially when COVID first started, remember, even though it was only a year ago, we were all like stressed out and we didn't know where it was, where we were headed, blah, blah, blah. The beauty of this area just kind of overwhelmed us. We were amazed at what a gorgeous, well-preserved outdoor area. It was just 1 hour away from DC. And so then we thought, boy, we should consider getting a place here. And one thing led to another, and we got our place in the Plains. So we really feel very fortunate and kind of lucky that all happened. And then as we're all bikers, we have 4 kids, we're all bicyclists, so we're riding around the area. blown away by how well protected everything is, and we see all the signs on different properties. This area is in conservation easement with PEC or the VOF or whomever. And as the former head of TNC, I can only think, wow, what an extraordinary demonstration of what people of goodwill and determination in concert with really skillful conservation organizations can accomplish. I mean, it's Exhibit A for what great conservation can accomplish. We're extremely impressed, and I'm sure many people on this call are generous supporters of those organizations. And all I can say is thank you for what you've done, and your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will thank you too. It's a marvelous area. And to me, it's amazing that it's right next to our nation's capital. What an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, it really is. And I know you're anxious to get out into it even more. I mean, you've only been in the neighborhood for a little bit, but I think as the spring comes on and you're out and you can get it and do some hiking, some of the areas, and come over to the mountain house for the Run Mountains Conservancy, and Michael can take you out on a couple of adventures.
I can't wait.
That'd be great. So when you think about then, we're talking about the value of nature and at a global level, but it ultimately, as you well know, it comes down to, a handful of dirt and a tree and water coming down a stream. And we have those, right? And kind of, as the Conservancy's mission is to educate, to research, to do research on the mountains and to steward the mountains, how do you, and largely our education's prioritizing younger residents in the area or in the community writ large. And, that challenge of getting the younger generation to be in touch with nature. I think they value it. They actually care about climate change and these issues greatly, but they don't necessarily have a hands-on value of nature. So how do you think about how an organization should do a better job? Because I know TNC spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to engage the younger generation and different members of the community, not just their donors, but
right,
to get them involved, get them excited, and get their hands on nature.
Yeah, well, your programs really look good to me. Now, I haven't participated yet, but at TNC, we were very geeky, which I loved. And so this is how we thought about it. TNC's donor base is mostly older people, great people. You couldn't have a better group of supporters. But if you ask them how they became conservationists, they mostly had stories about their childhood, like their grandparents had a ranch or a farm or something in their childhood powerfully connected them to nature, and they never let it go. Then our scientists brought to my attention that today's young people in America spend less than 1/3 the time outdoors that people my age did when I was young. And so then at TNC, we wondered, wow, who will be the conservationists of the future? How, in an era when kids are indoors more because the world's busy and competitive and we have the internet and all that stuff, that's why kids are indoors. How are we going to build a conservation ethic in future generations to sustain all these things we're doing? And so then it looks to me like the Run Mountains Conservancy programs are superb. They look like they're fun and they engage young people. And if you're doing your job well, the test will be, will the participants in those programs be supporters of conservation? Will they vote for environmental-minded political leaders? If they're business people, will they push their organizations to do the right thing? That's what drives all this. It all comes down to people, and you can't wait for somebody else to do it. I'm talking about adults. If you're an adult and you care about this stuff, you've got to do something. And so who will those adults be in the future? That's the Run Mountain Conservancy's opportunity, I think. It's a huge opportunity, and I almost can't think of a higher priority.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a big focus on the programs, and certainly in the last year, there's a struggle to how do you connect people to nature virtually? And really realistically, you can't, there's not enough nature to get everyone out into nature all the time, right? We need to figure out a way to bridge that too. So even if you can't get kids into nature to touch it, are there methodologies that are working to?
Yeah, we did stuff. I wouldn't not say this was TNC's area of strength, but we messed around. And we found all these new apps that like identify trees and birds, et cetera. Young people love that. So they could bring their phone with them into nature, enjoy nature, and then use the tool that they've come to love to accelerate their knowledge and engagement with nature. So I think there's reason to be encouraged. You can't like wistfully say, well, let's go back in the old days. That can't be a winning strategy. You've got to adjust strategies to make sense for today.
Right. Okay. And so when you think about the time that now living in the mountains, which I don't know if you've previously, actually lived in a mountain community.
No.
It's a little hard to, it is a mountain. You're on the edge of the mountain community, right? What are the things you're most looking forward to doing?
Oh, it's really amazing. Even though I had this fancy job at TNC, I've always been a city person my whole life. So it's thrilling. Amy and I we can't believe it, but like Saturday morning, Amy went away. So we have a back porch. I sat on my porch and listened to birds. I was blown away by the number of birds, the variety of bird calls. I was just blown away. We look forward to learning much more about how ecosystems work, and just spending time. On Bull Run Mountain Road, we've just been walking through those forests and kind of amazed by what we see, intrigued by what we don't yet fully understand. So we want to dig in, and then I want to be a good resident. I want to do what I can too to support conservation locally and protect and build on what's already been accomplished.
That's great. So we have a few minutes left. If anyone has any remaining questions, please feel free to throw them into the Q&A box or the chat box or anything where you can see those. And I'll go off on one more question and then we'll see where we go. So I want to go back to this question, and it is very specific to the Bull Run Mountains, which is it important for at a local level to actually try to put an economic value on those resources? Does it help in the mission? Does it really help at the policy level in the counties? Do you think that it's a
great question? What do you think?
I don't see how it hurts, but I don't think it actually changes. I don't think it's going to, because most politicians at the county level, they need things that are going to generate revenues.
Yeah.
Really trying to balance.
Maybe, I think you're probably right. You don't want to, everybody's so busy. You want to focus on the things that really make a difference. I have a few thoughts. Like I understand, I don't really know the details, but I understand there's a lot of land adjacent to Bull Run Mountain Road that could be for sale soon. And so, and it would allow for some development. Maybe it would be fine development. I don't know enough yet, but imagine we would like for that not to occur. Then you might want to think about, well, what are there some values for that we could think about it? Like, for example, what are the carbon sequestration or water quality and water quantity values? And might those considerations help us if there was a move to try to raise capital to buy that land rather than it go to a seller? This is the kind of thing TNC would always do. There might be some benefit from understanding those values. There might be some benefit to helping politicians when they fight for conservation goals to be able to talk about these things, even if they don't actually drive the decisions. There are still people who think, oh, protecting the nature is a luxury just for rich people. We've got to do more important things first. That was what my book was about, arguing, no, that's not true. So it's good to talk about this stuff and make people more aware of it. It's good always to build the political constituency for environmental protection and environmental progress. And so for example, another kind of discussion that people like is how protecting nature protects housing, real estate values. Those kinds of arguments can help. So there are such considerations. But perhaps locally, you don't need to worry about it like a TNC would on a global basis. I think it's vitally important, though, to continue to connect with people of all stripes, all political persuasions, and get them out in nature, help them understand why it matters, help them understand how they can enjoy it, why their kids and grandkids should care. Building the constituency for nature, I think, is always a priority.
Great. So we had another question that was sort of about grassroots shareholder advocacy for pushing companies to change. And the question was actually for both of us, if we think there's any efficacy, does that really make a difference? Huge
difference. CEOs are like afraid of their employees and their customers, community members, even recruits. Most CEOs are smart. That's why they're CEOs, and they know it's a hard job. And they're smart enough to know the world is changing. The world expects better behavior. And so then I did an interview with Larry Fink, who runs BlackRock. He was on the TNC board with me. BlackRock's the biggest money manager in the world. And he said, look, I'm not telling anybody what to do, but I am telling you, money's going to flow to companies who do the right thing here, and it's going to flow away from the companies who do the wrong thing. CEOs know that, but stakeholders can pound the table and encourage leadership teams to be bolder and faster moving. And I would encourage everybody to do that, whether you're an employee, customer, shareholder, speak up. You might be surprised. People will listen to you. Yeah, and I would certainly echo that. And I think for, specifically on shareholders being active, I think it's the area that is, we've had for years customers being very active and expressing their opinion by virtue of both chat boxes and social media, but also with their dollars, with their wallet. Employees have been very active. Most CEOs will say that the number one site that recruits go to on their website is the sustainability page. So they know that. But the last bastion is the investor. Is now part of the story. And all of us, no matter where you're investing, whether directly or you're using an asset manager, need to be better informed on these issues, and particularly around shareholder voting and proxy voting. And there's a great organization called As You Sow that is, they can be a little bit activist, maybe not everyone's, but they are great at providing information about how asset managers are voting, the big mutual funds. And you can use that to help decide whether you want to continue to invest, because we all need to know where we're investing, which is our biggest resource, our biggest lever that we have, most of us have. So certainly think it's an important thing. We're actually amazingly at the end of the hour, and I guess I need to just thank you, Mark, for your taking the time with us this evening. It's been definitely a lot to think about for everyone. But this is a wonky group, and we like to think about big issues. We definitely appreciate it. And then everyone will be happy to get out in the woods tomorrow and just put their feet on the ground and really enjoy it. So thank you very much, Mark, for joining us. Well, let me say thank you, Tim, for inviting me and for managing this conversation so nicely. But more importantly, thank you to the Run Mountains Conservancy, and thanks to all of the supporters. I think you're doing really important, great work. Keep it up. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Hope everyone has a great evening. And if you haven't already, give a thought to looking at the website and considering giving a small donation to support the organization.
Hear, hear.
Very much. All right.
Bye-bye.